Mike Babcock's blunder in Columbus has him out as head coach of the Blue Jackets. Hey everyone, Rob Wong, joined alongside by Toronto Sun sports columnist Steve Simmons. And Steve, I think it's a conclusion that many thought was going to be the case, as Mike Babcock has resigned as head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets in the wake of allegations that he violated players' privacy by asking to see photos on their cell phones. What do you make of this whole mess?
Well, it's a narcissist acting to form, which is what you would expect really from Mike Babcock, who apparently didn't learn anything from the problems that he had in Toronto and some of the problems he had previously in Detroit. And so, sometimes you can't help but be who you are. And in this case, Mike was being who he is, and he crossed the line. And they'll call it a resignation. I love when they do that. It's never a resignation. Let's call it what it is. He's been fired. He's out. It wasn't his choice. I know Mike. Two things. He would want to coach that team, and he'd want to get paid, the millions he was supposed to get paid to coach that team. Now we know he's not going to coach that team, and what we don't know is how much, if anything, will he be paid for being let go before he ever coached a game or a practice.
Yeah, not getting to the first game of the season, let alone training camp, might be a first in NHL history. Of course, Mike Babcock didn't hire himself, Steve, in Columbus. A lot of fingers are being pointed at GM Jarmo Kekalainen and President of Hockey Ops John Davidson. What do you think something like this does for their reputations around the game of hockey?
Well, if you've known John Davidson like I've known John Davidson for about the last 40 years, he's one of the finest people that you'll ever meet. And I think most people who know him and are aware of him and have reputation or relationships with him are aware of that. And so people might take a step back and say, why would John Davidson do this? And why would Jarmo Kekalainen, who works very closely with John, do this? And, I think it was a desperate move for a team that needed something desperate, and it was a mistake. And I'm not sure you judge an entire career or an entire body of work. A Hall of Fame broadcaster in Davidson ran the New York Rangers, ran the St. Louis Blues, now running the Blue Jackets. I'll go to the wall believing in John Davidson because I've known him for so long and I know who he is and what he's all about. Did they have any notion that something like this would happen? I suspect not. And I suspect probably they talked about don't get into, what has got you in trouble in the past. And I suspect that was part of the interview process and all that. But in the end, what I like about how the NHL dealt with this, the NHL Players Association, which never used to deal with anything, by the way, the very fact that they're involved in this tells you something about the new executive director there. The fact that all these sides were involved, the league, the PA, whoever on the Blue Jackets originally leaked this to the person who then contacted the podcast Spitting Chicklets, there's a lot of moving parts here. And I don't know if anybody other than Mike Babcock is to blame for what happened to Mike Babcock.
And lastly, you mentioned, the Hockey Hall of Fame there with John Davidson, and Mike Babcock clearly has a resume that would warrant that induction maybe down the road. But based on everything that has happened in the last few years, and as you mentioned, dating back to Toronto and Detroit, what do you think that may do for his potential candidacy?
Well, the Hall of Fame has two coaching problems right now, as of today. They have Joel Quenneville with 3 Stanley Cups and the Blackhawks mess on his resume. And now they have Babcock with 10 very strong seasons with the Detroit Red Wings, 2 Olympic gold medals, a World Cup win, a spot in the Stanley Cup final with Anaheim in his first year in the league, and a real sound 3 years in Toronto. And you look at it big picture and say, yeah, that's easy. But it's not easy now. And, this is the world we live in now where, you're not just judged on wins and losses. You're not just judged on, what your record is or how many championships won. You're judged on who you are and how you behaved and how you acted. And I think if Mike Babcock was a sure thing Hall of Famer a year ago, he might be a long shot today.
Definitely crazy times in Columbus with the Blue Jackets. You can find Steve's thoughts on the Mike Babcock situation in the Toronto Sun.